Happy Friday, and welcome to your last episode of BrainScratch for the year. I'm your host, John Lorden, and we have another mystery to go into today. Before we do that, just a quick reminder, this is the last episode on the Lorden Arts channel for 2019. I am taking 2 weeks off, so I'll also be gone for part of the beginning of January. Shows will resume with Case Cracked on Monday, January 6th. However, if you guys are really worried that you're going to miss me, we have a new episode of Three Men and a Mystery that's dropping next Monday. So you can catch that over on the Three Men and a Mystery channel. I'll have a link in the description box down below. And of course, on January 1st, a brand new episode of Crime After Crime. You can watch myself and Danielle Hallen duke it out with crimes from our birth years. And for anyone wondering, that means 1975 versus 1992. Why did that make me feel so old all of a sudden? Anyway, it's a great episode. I hope you guys will check that out. And that's going to be happening while I'm taking this break as well. On top of all that, for Three Men and a Mystery, we actually dropped kind of a bonus episode. We did a live stream over on Gray's channel. That has also been released on the podcast, so you guys can check that out. There's a very special moment that happens towards the end of that episode. I think you guys want to see that. I really don't think you want to miss it. So that's what's happening for the next few weeks. If anyone's wondering, yeah, John, what are you going to do? I don't quite know. I've got some things that I need to focus on, just small things like I want to make a few minor changes to my studio. Nothing too major. Quite honestly, I don't even think you guys are going to notice it. Just some kind of homekeeping stuff. You know, it's the end of the year, so I've got like financial stuff that I have to prepare and get all that together. I really want to play some more Red Dead Redemption 2. I really want to play some more video games. I want to see the new Star Wars. I got a bunch of stuff that I want to do over the next 2 weeks. But rest assured, I'll be mixing in the fun with actually laying out some groundwork for the channel for 2020. So that's my big plan. With all that being said, let's start talking about today's case. And this is one, I just want to give a big shout out to all the brain scratchers in the UK. We're covering a case that actually seems like it is fairly popular in the UK. When I look on YouTube, I can see that there's a lot of videos related to it, but those videos don't have a lot of views. And this is a case that really deserves attention. It really deserves to have the exposure raised. So we're going to try to do that together today. This is a case that's also a bit older. This is a case from back in 1988. And just imagine, it's the late 80s. You're 18 years old. You're from Germany. You decide you want to see some more of Europe and you go on a trip. And then tragedy strikes. That's the case we're talking about today. And that case is the case of Inga Maria Hauser. Let me bring up a photo of Inga. Here's a photo of her. At 18 years old, there's not a ton of information, especially being from the late 80s. It's not like I have social media to lean on to learn more about her. Be clear, this is a woman. She is loved by her family. She's dearly missed by her family. She's essentially pulled together a community of people that have cared about this case since it occurred back in '88 and for decades now. You're going to see the news stories that we go through actually lead right up to just a few days ago. So this is a very important case. She traveled to Northern Ireland, and unfortunately, that is where tragedy struck. Let's go ahead and bring up a poster here. 30 years ago, in April of 1988, Inga Maria Hauser was found murdered. And they're showing a picture of the pack that she was using to travel. You can see it says USAF on it and has an American Air Force logo. She was found in Ballypatrick Forest in Ballycastle, Northern Ireland. She arrived there on the Larne Stranraer Ferry on the 6th of April, 1988. And by the way, I'm going to do the best that I can with these names, guys, but I haven't been to Ireland since I was a little kid, so my My Irish pronunciation is probably a little busted up. You can see from this poster, they're asking, do you remember seeing her? Do you know anything about her movements from the 6th of April? She wouldn't be found for approximately 2 weeks later. So there's a gap of time there that perhaps might have something important. Interestingly, I don't know that they really have a firm determination on when she was actually killed. I think the assumption is that it probably was on the 6th of April or very close to that, but I'm not finding very solid detail on that. It does seem like law enforcement is certainly holding their cards close to their vest. There's certain details that they were putting out there that are being repeated by a lot of different news organizations, but it's not the most in-depth information. So I think they're really trying to make sure that they can prosecute when they do get to that point. Let's start with an article from BBC.com. This was posted March 2011. And this case, I'm going to run a little bit differently. You guys know, typically I'll show you the sources almost kind of in chronological order. I researched this one a little bit backwards, but I found a decent way to convey all the critical information to you guys. So we're going to bounce around in dates just a little bit. But Inga Maria Hauser's body was found in a remote part of Ballypatrick Forest on the 20th of April, 1988. Her neck was broken. She had also been sexually assaulted. The 18-year-old had arrived in Larne in Northern Ireland on the 6th of April on a ferry from Scotland. Detective Superintendent Raymond Murray said he could not rule out the possibility that more than one person was involved in her murder. And Raymond Murray would really carry the torch of this investigation for years. We're going to hear his name come up a lot in these articles as we're rolling through them. Police had a report that a man in the rural area east of Ballymoney was seen soon after the murder with scratches on his face, and there had been concern in the community that he was involved in the killing. So pretty interesting that we have someone being noticed with those types of wounds. What's more interesting is I don't really see kind of a way that that's closed out. At least in the articles that I'm reviewing for this. It doesn't seem all that simple because obviously this case hasn't been solved in over 30 years. So I don't know if this man is really related to the case or not. I see references to this all over the place, that he was noticed, people saw him. I'm not seeing a lot of follow-up information in terms of, was he interviewed? Did they look into his background? Did he have criminal past or anything like that? Or honestly, was he even identified? Everything kind of refers to him as that guy that everyone noticed that had the scratches on his face. Let's continue at Irish Times and try to find some more detail. Ms. Hauser's diary and notebook entries, which chart her journey, have also been of use to officers trying to track down who murdered her. It's really interesting to me because it reminds me a bit of the case I was talking about last week. But in that case, we had a bit of a social media footprint where we could really learn a lot about that person. Here, we don't quite have publicly accessible information like that, but we do have her diary. This is someone that wrote about what she was going through, and parts of that have been released to the press. So we can pick up on that here and learn a little more. She had been in London, Bath, Liverpool, Preston, Inverness, where she cashed traveler's checks, and Glasgow. She was excited about coming to Northern Ireland as she wrote a postcard to her friend in Germany saying, "My journey through England is wonderful. I'd rather not come back. The day after tomorrow, it's on to Ireland, which pleases me most of all." And for anyone curious, Inga was actually from Munich, Germany. On her last day alive, April 6th, she traveled by train from Inverness to Glasgow and then on to Stranraer before boarding the Sea-Link Galloway Princess to Larne at 7 p.m. Her notebook entry reads, "Morning has broken in Scotland. Breakfast in Inverness, nice town. Have to see the Loch Ness Monster one day. Going to Glasgow now. Snowy mountains and wild landscape. Scotland is beautiful." I don't know about you guys, but I just really get this sense of youth and excitement, just kind of eyes wide open, taking in the world, taking on this journey. For a story like this, where we know that this is an untimely end, there is just this pulse of life that I get when I'm able to read her words like this. And that's really why I wanted to be sure to share that with you guys as well. DCS Murray says that she was wearing baseball boots and a long flowing skirt, possibly multicolored, a jacket, possibly denim, with large blue rucksack. On top of this rucksack was a smaller bag with distinctive USAF badge, which of course we saw in the poster that we were looking at earlier. According to her diary and notebook entry, she was excited about her trip to Northern Ireland, and it is a fair assumption that she would most likely have chatted to passengers on the train or ferry, asking questions about where to visit in Northern Ireland or where she could stay, he said. The police trail runs cold after she arrived in Larne, and the officers are keen to know, did she leave the ship with anyone? Did she leave in someone's vehicle, or did she leave as a foot passenger? It's interesting because I'm seeing kind of a few different versions of what happens after she gets off the ferry. In one version, I'm seeing that she was actually given a ride by a truck driver. But in other versions, it seems like the police really have no idea how she went where she did actually wind up. And what's interesting about that is she seemed to be telling people that she was actually heading to Belfast. And if we take a look at a map here, this is where she would actually be found in Ballypatrick Forest, pretty close to this exact mark, actually. But if we pull back, the ferry actually comes in Larne, which is here, and Belfast is down here. I know that she was also talking about eventually getting to Dublin, which is even way further south than that. So somehow she winds up going north, and that's kind of a big part of this mystery as well. How did she wind up going in that direction? Was someone possibly lying to her? Someone, hey, I'll give you a ride, let's go, and just took off in the wrong direction, and she wouldn't have known any different because she's not from the area. I don't know. There's a few different possibilities I could think of like that. Her last notebook entry on April 6th reads, went from Glasgow to Ayr and from there to Stranraer to get over to Ireland. Saw the sea, beautiful and mysterious. Wonder where I stay tonight. Need more money. And I'm wondering if there's something in that could be a clue about what happened as well. If she's really running low on money, is she trying to get to a hostel? Did someone offer her a place to stay? Could that be part of the reason why she heads off in the wrong direction? I saw one point someone made online about, well, if she was heading to a hostel, this is kind of strange because she's arriving by ferry around 7 p.m. By the time she gets to Belfast, it's nighttime. She doesn't really know the area that well, so how is she going to find a hostel if that was her plan? So it's kind of interesting. I don't know how well her travel was planned out. I'm not seeing a lot of information related to that, so I don't know. Maybe she did have a particular hostel that she already knew about in Belfast, and she knew that she could arrive there late and it wouldn't be a problem. It's certainly possible, but these are the words we have to look at. These are the considerations we can make. Seems like we know she had traveler's checks. She cashed some traveler's checks, but by the time on April 6th, she's basically saying she does need more money. So would that change the considerations for her in terms of where she's going and where she would wind up? Unfortunately, this is where she would wind up in that park after being brutally attacked. DailyRecord.co.uk has an article, Cops plea for help in solving murder mystery. Police believe someone is still protecting the killer. And here not only do we have a picture of Inga, but we have a picture of her mother as well, who literally is waiting for justice for decades. Let's see what we can learn from this article. And there's a few pictures you're going to see pretty much time and time again. Keep in mind, this is 1988, so not nearly as many different photos of her, but this is another photo of her. And I just want to spend some time on those photos because there might be someone out there and that could be the trigger. It could be I remember that girl. Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, Detective Chief Superintendent Raymond Murray acknowledged strenuous efforts to find the killer or killers over the last 3 decades had yet to succeed, but he insisted the case was still active and officers remained tantalizingly close to catching those responsible. I'm interested in the presumption that there could be more than one killer. Just to let you guys know from the information I'm seeing, they do have a DNA profile of one of the attackers if there is more than one attacker, but I'm not exactly sure what is pushing them to the thought that there might have been more than one person, which they seem to be chasing very strongly through all the articles that I'm reading. So it seems to me like they have a pretty good reason to think that. Just once again, cards are close to the chest. They're not coming forward with that. But let's see what else we can learn here. In one of the largest DNA screenings ever undertaken in the UK, 2,000 samples failed to produce a definitive match to a male genetic profile found at the murder scene. So keep in mind, this is late 80s approach to using DNA. So what would they do back then? Basically, they had the start of probably what you'd consider an offenders database. So they were probably starting to track known offenders and putting that together. But really, for that time period, it came down to matches. It came down to, we need to find an exact match to this DNA. So they literally went door to door, just around those neighborhoods, through those areas, and asked people for samples, collected those samples, and then ran the DNA against it. That is a pretty large and very manual effort, particularly looking back on it with how we handle these DNA cases nowadays. Unfortunately, it did not seem to produce a result. Murray said Ms. Hauser had been a victim of a vicious and ruthless assault. Detectives believe whoever killed her had a sexual motive. Certainly makes sense, because we know that a sexual assault is a component to this, and we know she probably didn't have a ton of money on her. I mean, she's literally writing about that as well. So straight up robbery, certainly not a motive in this. Extensive inquiries were also conducted with people who were on the ferry in 1988, despite there being incomplete passenger records. Once again, just in terms of how you investigate something like this, they're hitting some really tough obstacles and then just trying to brute force it and work through those. So apparently they were putting back together, hey, who could we figure out was on that ferry? And then probably asking them, do you know anyone else that was on the ferry? And then just going through this chain of connected people to try to piece back together everyone that might have been on that ferry back then. We've interviewed and recorded statements from hundreds of people and also carried out a renewed house-to-house strategy in 2011. So we're talking literally decades after this case. They are still attacking it. They're still, and in that kind of brute force manner, just in the, there doesn't seem to be a way to kind of outsmart this case. We have to do it manually. We have to go door by door. It's about talking to people. It's about collecting information. And that apparently is going on for just a ton of time around this case. It's kind of unbelievable to me, because you look at how cases are structured nowadays, and particularly I review a lot of American cases, obviously. You'll see some efforts kind of in this vein, but nowhere near the scope, nowhere near the depth, and certainly for that amount of time after. So I'm honestly kind of impressed at the effort that's going on here. And I think there's a component to all this where they're feeling bad because she traveled to that area. She came from another country. I've seen some comments by some people that have been working on this case where they're like, hey, I have children. I have children that traveled when they were young. I trust those other countries to be able to welcome them and take care of them while they're there. And in this case, we were in that situation and we didn't step up to do it. I'm really interested in that perspective and taking on that level of responsibility from that direction. I wish we had a similar thing happen in the Colin Madsen case in terms of Russia. I wish that we could feel that way about their investigation into what happened to him. But another interesting thing to note about this is we're talking about Northern Ireland in the late 80s, and Daily Record calls it out here. This is a comment added by Murray. While it has to be recognized that Northern Ireland is dealing with a legacy of over 3,000 murders linked to the Troubles, which is unique compared to any other European country. The PSNI is keen to bring Inga Maria's murderer to justice. For anyone that isn't aware exactly of what the Troubles is, there's a Wikipedia article on it. You can read all about it. Let's just touch on it so that we know. The Troubles is a conflict in Northern Ireland during the late 20th century, also known internationally as the Northern Ireland Conflict. The conflict began in the late 1960s and is usually deemed to have ended with the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. The conflict was primarily political and nationalistic. A key issue was the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. Unionists, loyalists, who were mostly Protestants, wanted Northern Ireland to remain within the United Kingdom. Irish nationalists, Republicans, who were mostly Catholics, wanted Northern Ireland to leave the United Kingdom and join a united Ireland. And we're talking, first of all, Bloody Sunday. Any fans of U2, Sunday Bloody Sunday? We're talking very serious events, bombings, killings. As a matter of fact, that quote of 3,000 that we heard from the article, according to Wikipedia, it was more than 3,500 people killed during that conflict. So that's going on in this area while she arrives there too. Is this case really related to that or not? I don't know, but it does certainly tell you about the status of police services at that time. They were probably fielding a lot of crimes related to the Troubles. So how are their resources in terms of handling something like this would certainly be a question. I think it would certainly be affected by this as well. Inga Maria's family deserve to know what happened and bring them some degree of closure. And here's another shot of her mother holding a photo of her. So we have these efforts being put on by Police Services Northern Ireland for literally decades. And then it seems like in 2018, something starts to change. And if you're a fan of the channel, you probably know that there was a trend, especially here in the US, that started in 2018, where all of a sudden DNA could be used in a whole new different way, and that was genealogy. You could actually use DNA to trace family members. Is that going to come into play here? Let's continue with another article over at belfastlive.co.uk. Police call for killer's family to speak out. This is from April 2018. And as another interesting aspect, when you have a case that goes on this long, the chance that the killer has spoken to someone, friends and potentially family, is probably fairly high. So now you have the police reaching out directly to those members, trying to get them to speak. Over the next 2 weeks, the PSNI plans to post Inga Maria's picture at crucial locations, as well as making new information public in a bid to find the killer and end her family's torture. They especially want to hear from North Antrim locals and those who may have seen her traveling from London northwards to Scotland before taking the Stranraer to Larne Ferry on April 6, 1988. Detective Chief Superintendent Raymond Murray is leading the investigation into her murder. And we can see DCS, I think it's DCSI if I remember right, Raymond Murray here. And here we get our first note about possible new twists on DNA. A quote from Murray: "As time evolves, so does DNA science. So we have carried out further familial DNA screening and are keeping an open mind about where this will lead the investigation." Basically, around this time, we've got everything starting to shake out with the Golden State Killer case here in the U.S. Of course, I'm sure scientists around the world are watching, figuring out, is this a method we can use here as well? I've looked a little bit into UK's history with that. They had scientists working on that aspect as well prior. And some of the things I don't know about are like, are detectives in the UK able to reach out to a company like GEDmatch or use GEDmatch in the same way? And would the GEDmatch information be helpful? Is genealogy really contained regionally? Because I would think of GEDmatch as kind of a more United States collection of information. But I actually went to a really interesting discussion about DNA at a conference I went to this past year. And the experts there were saying, if we had a catalog of only 2% of the population, that would effectively solve 90% of the crimes. And that's really just in terms of genealogy and how all that information could be used to trace relationships and connections between everyone. So hitting that threshold doesn't sound like it's crazy. Now, I know we took a big step back, especially with GEDmatch kind of locking up their information, but it looks like we've got new methods to kind of break through that now as well. It's really about collecting enough of that information for it to be useful. Does the UK have something similar to that? I really couldn't find any database in particular, but I do think that the GEDmatch component might actually be helpful. Either way, we clearly have them stating here, familial DNA screenings are being done around this case. And I'm hoping that might still be a factor in breaking this case open. There's something about this case that to me feels like it could literally be on the verge of being cracked. Like I feel like tomorrow an article could come out with this case. The question is that realistic? Is it tomorrow? Is it months? Is it still years off? And that I don't know, but we're going to have a better idea by the end of today's episode. Inga Maria's family deserve to know what happened. Her father died not knowing who killed his daughter, and her mother has been ill for many years. And then he makes a direct call to the people he's reaching for. If you are a family member who has information or who even assisted the killer or killers in the aftermath of the incident, search your conscience, as now is the time that common humanity should override misplaced loyalty. I really appreciate how he phrased that, especially about the misplaced loyalty. I really wonder about that. How could you be loyal even to a family member knowing that they had brutally killed an 18-year-old like that? I wish there was some magic combination of words that would help people feel it within their heart and move them to do the right thing. And quite honestly, that's a big part of what I do here on the channel. I'm hoping that putting this information out and putting it out in the way that I do helps motivate people to pick up that phone, send that email, or just get that information in. Obviously, the police working on this case feel the same way and are trying to do the same thing. Over at irishnews.com, only fractional evidence needed to catch Inga Maria Hauser killers, says detective. Once again, he's being very clear about using the plural there. This is from April 2018. We are investigators and we keep an open mind, but the evidence and the information and the intelligence that we have to date has led us to focus on a very, very small numbers of individuals, Murray said. Mr. Murray confirmed that all the suspects were still alive, though he declined to confirm whether they still lived in the North Antrim area. They will know who they are, he said. He raises a really interesting point there because 2018, April 6th, we're actually talking about 30 years after the fact there. And if these were middle-aged men at that time, they could be getting close to the end of their life. There could be the chance that the murderer has actually already passed away. Here we're getting confirmation that at least for the people they're interested in, all those people are actually still alive. Mr. Murray revealed that further DNA testing has been carried out and the results were expected within days. I just feel like it's coming, right? They're going to break through this. They're going to find a family member. Here at belfasttelegraph.co.uk, emotional scenes as Inga Maria Hauser Memorial unveiled at Forest Burial Spot. I'll actually have a YouTube link in the sources down below that is the ceremony that they had around this at the 30th anniversary. This is a picture of the stone that was obviously placed there. Has the date that she was born. You can see that she was just about a month off of her 19th birthday. Also states never forgotten. Time will see your tears run dry. There's a mockingbird singing songs in the trees. And they placed 30 roses there, one for each of the years that this case was unsolved. I also want to give a very big shout out to Claire McNeely, who wrote this piece. This piece is written in a whole different way. I really wish we had more journalists like this here in the U.S. Claire just really opened up her heart when she wrote this piece and did it in a really kind of, it's beautiful and it's a little haunting, but it seems it's just so respectful and appropriate for this case. And I really appreciate that she did it in that style. Here's a quote from her. Apparently she did attend it herself. "A man standing next to me, shielded from the torrential rain by a dark woolly hat, grasped my arm gently. He was fighting back tears when he admitted that he was still feeling forlorn. But for him, the guilt is more pointed, more personal. 30 years ago, I drove past her that day, the day she was murdered," he said. "She was hitchhiking and I could have stopped and given her a lift, but I didn't. She was carrying a backpack and heading towards this forest. I slowed down and almost stopped, but at the last minute, I drove on. I'll never forget looking in the mirror. It was definitely her. 2 weeks later, I was driving down the motorway when I heard the news about her murder. I nearly crashed." And just to give you guys a little sense of the writing that's going on in this piece, it was perhaps fittingly a miserable day weather-wise, but for those of us who attended, the misery was fleeting and finite. If only the same could be said for the Hauser family. That really hits me personally because that's something I'm keenly aware of in terms of dealing with family members. I mentioned to you guys we had the live stream. That was literally last night from when I'm recording this, and I'm still kind of reeling from that. Being connected to family members that have dealt with something like this for a prolonged period of time, you do realize it's something they're stuck in. It's something that they're coping with every single day. And in the case we're covering on 3 men, that's 3 years at this point. For this case, it's 31 years. That is a lot of heartbreak for any person to take on and should significantly affect your life. And in this case, it seems like it certainly does that as well. Another article from Belfast Telegraph. IRA's secret investigation into German backpacker murder. Interesting. So the Irish Republican Army, which is part of that whole the Troubles thing that we talked about earlier, apparently looked into this. An IRA unit which conducted a secret investigation into the murder of a German backpacker could hold vital clues about her killer. Quote, "They have identified somebody that was responsible from the Lochiel area and believe they had a debate amongst themselves about whether that information should be passed in one way or another to the police," a source said. "It is understood that at least one of those involved in the IRA's clandestine investigation may be dead, but," the source added, "there may well be other people who were privileged to the debate that was held." Raymond Murray, the officer leading the murder hunt, said, "We have been aware of this account of events for some time, and I would reiterate my appeal for anyone with information to come forward. It is not too late to tell us what you know." A little bit of an interesting twist here because you seem to have a source that knows about the conversation but doesn't really know the contents of that conversation. It's interesting to me that you would have a leak kind of in this manner of, well, I know that they were talking about it and they were discussing should they reach out to police, but apparently I don't know what they were thinking about reaching out to police and actually telling them. Just another bizarre twist in all of this. But here we get to May 1st, 2018 with a big headline. I keep wanting this to turn into a case cracked on you guys, and it's weird because I've done all the research and I still have that feeling as I'm pulling through it with you guys now. Police get DNA results. They say they have met scientists and other specialists in order to analyze the results. Police renewed their appeal for information last month, the 30th anniversary of the murder. They say they have received more than 30 calls. So if nothing else, even before we talk about the DNA, the efforts of them trying to keep this in the public eye, doing these interviews, getting those quotes out there, having the memorial event, all of that at least worked to the point of generating 30 more calls to them with information. Here's another quote from Raymond Murray. "Some of the developments over this period have been interesting and are being processed by the investigation team." We also hear from a family member in this article. Her sister, Friedrich Liebel, has issued a letter through the PSNI appealing for information. "It's been nearly 30 years since my younger sister, Inga Maria, was so brutally murdered. You cannot imagine how the murder of my sister has affected my family. We are broken inside. My father was worst hit. He fell ill with prostate cancer in 2005 and was treated for depression when the whole body was full of cancer. The fact of being confronted with this murder for a lifetime is just cruel, sick, sick. So I ask you to come forward with information. Otherwise, my sister's soul will never rest. So a matter of days after that information, and keep in mind, the title of that article is, hey, cops have the DNA results, but in terms of the actual information that's in here, it's really not clear about what those results are. It just says that they've been working with the scientists, they've got their results, people are analyzing it, but there's really no other information about what those results are or what that actually contains. However, a number of days later, we then get this. 2 men arrested, and this is May 21st, 2018. The 2 suspects, aged 58 and 61, were held in the Log Isle area of County Antrim early on Monday morning. And we're not going to get a lot of detail, but here we at least do get ages. And if we're talking about this is 30 years after the fact, that means one of them would have been 28 years old at the time, and the other one was 31. After Monday's arrests, Raymond Murray renewed his appeal for information. Pretty interesting turn here, because when I first hear about arrests happening, especially on the heels of an announcement like, hey, we got our DNA results, I'm thinking, okay, case solved, right? I mean, and that's something that we actually have to watch for here in the US, because we kind of put a lot of stock into DNA. And it's hard not to, especially if you've got DNA. Like if you're talking about a sexual assault and the DNA is from that sexual assault, you then have the person that was part of that sexual assault. But there's another component to this. There's actually, you have to boil it down to 2 separate crimes that are happening. There's a sexual assault and then there's a murder. And even if you have DNA tying to the sexual assault, does that necessarily give you proof that that's the person that murdered them as well? So it's pretty interesting to me that there's an arrest, and then basically Raymond Murray's coming out and he's saying, hey, by the way, it's not too late. We still need people to come forward and tell us what you know. But his tone changes at this time. Failure to do so can be a criminal offense in itself, and surely it would be better to come to police and discuss what happened rather than take the risk we will come to you. The 2 men are being questioned by detectives. So a little bit of what I would consider an implied threat there, that if you have information that you've been holding out to protect one of these guys or both of these guys or someone else, anyone that's related to actually doing the crime in this case, there might be charges coming your way as well. At least that's what seems like to be the undertone to me in that statement. Back to another article at Belfast Telegraph. This is from May 22nd, 2018. So we're talking literally a day later. Guys are arrested on Monday, and on Tuesday, a 58-year-old man arrested in connection with the murder of Inga Maria Hauser has been released on bail pending further police inquiries. A 61-year-old man, also arrested on Monday, was released on bail earlier on Tuesday. So it's strange, because a couple articles ago, you start feeling real strong. You hear about the DNA result, you hear about an arrest, but then they're literally released the following day. Now, I'm not as familiar, of course, with criminal proceedings in the UK, but for here in the US, if there's DNA that's linking someone to a crime as bad as this, they usually find a way to keep that person incarcerated, or they will appear in front of a judge. The judge might set a bail amount that is so astronomical that it's really not feasible for that person to actually get released. But here, it seems like things are a little bit more, in terms, maybe a little more practical or practically natured. Obviously, it was a bail amount that was reasonable, because both these men are literally released the next day. But it also makes you wonder about, if this is from the DNA result, what's the problem with it? Why isn't a very strong connection? Because we have Murray coming out asking the public for more information still, and then we know that they're released the next day. Now, in a bizarre turn of events, there's actually a television special that airs, I believe it aired the night that they were arrested, about this case as well. And we hear from another family member over at Belfast Live. Emotional TV appeal for justice. And this is Inga's nephew, Victor Leibel. Victor Leibel said his mother, Frederica, feels guilty as the last time she spoke to her only sibling, they had argued. I hope the murderer gets caught and my mother can finally leave this behind and we can be free of this, he said. Victor, who spoke to Spotlight in Salzburg, told how his grandparents, Inga's parents, were never the same after their daughter's death. The program also heard how one of the last postcards Inga sent home while she was in England preparing to go to Ireland saw her say, she can't imagine anything bad would happen, as everyone she had met was so helpful. So you might look at the title of this article and think, wait, John already read us this story from a different source. Actually, this one's different. Look at the date. This is from February 6th, 2019. The man, aged 59, same guy that they had arrested previously and got out on bail, was brought back in February of 2019. On Tuesday, police investigating the murder were granted an additional 14 hours to question the man on suspicion of murder. And literally, that's about all that comes out in this article, not much more detail. But then we jump forward to July of 2019, and it seems like the case is actually progressing because the Public Prosecution Service receives a lengthy file of evidence against the chief suspect in this case. I bet it's that same 59-year-old guy. Police believe Ms. Hauser, who was from Munich, died shortly after she arrived in Northern Ireland, having been subjected to a vicious and ruthless sexual and physical assault. Solicitor Claire McKeegan of Phoenix Law, who represents the Hauser family, welcomed the move, saying it was an important next step in their lengthy quest for justice. Given the length of time this family have already waited, I would hope that the PPS could prioritize this case and ensure there are no further delays. So we have this chain of events that really looks like this is pushing forward towards a case cracked here. But now we're talking about this from July of 2019. I think the solicitor is making a really good point. This is a family that has waited over 31 years at this point for justice. The father's already gone. We know the mother isn't in great health. And can the PPS prioritize this? I don't know if that consideration was heard. I don't know if the PPS did act on that. But here we are in December of 2019, about to roll into 2020. There is no update on this case progressing beyond this point. We do have other news updates, though, a very unfortunate one, and that is Inga Maria Hauser's mom dies without seeing justice for her daughter. And unfortunately, that happened in October of this year. So she will not come to know who did that terrible thing to her daughter, unfortunately. And then we get to articles, these ones literally just kicking out a few days ago, Christmas gift plea for Inga Maria Hauser's family. And we can see a new photo of someone at the memorial, and you can see the memorial has a lot of visitors that are coming by, leaving items. The greatest gift the family of a German teenager murdered in Northern Ireland could receive is information that could lead to justice, a memorial service heard. The memorial was held on Saturday at the spot where her body was found. Mourners laid a Christmas wreath and German flag at the memorial plaque dedicated to her. So this is kind of interesting to me. I don't know what prompts the memorial to happen at this time. I don't know if this is something that's driven by the family or if this was something that was driven by law enforcement. Law enforcement seems to have some hand in some of the previous memorials that have happened. And this date, she was born in May, she died in April. So for this to have happened in December, I don't know what prompted this memorial service. And it's not quite being used in the same way. I mean, the article does kind of hit the same points in terms of the details. You do get the quote from Murray in there about them looking for information. It does mention that the file is now over at the Public Prosecution Service, but other than that, there's really no further updates. So I'm kind of curious about what happened to prompt this memorial service. And I don't know. maybe that could mean this thing. I just really get the feeling this is right on the verge. Maybe there is an update that's going to come next week. Maybe it'll come at the start of the year. And for anyone that wants to learn much more about this case, there is also a blog. This is run by a woman who is a musician. She has written several songs about this case. She was actually at the memorial service where they initially dedicated the stone. She sang there. She's been doing pretty much a monthly blog for years, I think like for the past 5 years. So a ton of information and a pretty interesting perspective that you can get over at the Keeley Chronicles about this case. And there's kind of a special connection between the writer of this blog and Inga Maria, because some information comes out that Inga Maria herself also liked to perform and sing. As a matter of fact, they have a tape of her singing that I would like to end today's video with. So we'll run some of that right before we finish. But before that, just a quick reminder, in the description box below, all the sources that we covered today, plus contact information. If this video does get in front of the eyes of someone that has information on this case, please do the right thing. Please step up. Please help them close this case out. Please help this family process this, because they have been stuck with this for 31 years, and it's truly terrible. Please consider their point of view and do the right thing in all this. Also, before I end today's video, I want to thank Randy Vocal for supporting on PayPal and Jennifer Dixon for also supporting on PayPal. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do that over at lordandarts.com. Quick reminder, back on January 6th. I'll see you guys there. And now let's end today's video with a little bit of music from a life that ended too soon.
If you intend thus to disdain, it does the more enrapture me, and even so I still remain a lover in captivity.
Thank you for all your support in 2019. I wish each and every one of you a happy holidays. Stay safe, keep your families safe, and I'll see you back here in 2020.
This was my